So I've spoken in depth in the past about all the awesome things about packing all your stuff up, selling all your crap, and moving to a country like Southeast Asia to escape the cost of living crisis in Australia. I've talked about a lot of the benefits doing that. But what I haven't spoken about yet is some of the cons of packing up your life, putting it in suitcases, and going to another country. So for those who don't know who I am, my name is Jimmy, and myself and my wife and our two boys, we sold everything we owned, we hit the road, and we now live in Penang in Southeast Asia. And if you want to learn more about that adventure, make sure to subscribe to the channel. So like I've mentioned, there are a bunch of pros about leaving Australia: quality of life, the cost of living, spending more time as a family. I think everyone gets the romance of what we're doing, but let's be honest and realistic. It is not for everyone. And there are some pretty decent negatives about the way we're traveling. And I think it's important to be pragmatic about this. Obviously, we do sell this lifestyle. We do sell the idea of what we've done. And on paper, it sounds really good, but there are some pretty decent cons to this that you need to consider before you go ahead and do what we're doing, which is living in another country with your family. And I think the first con is that logistically, it's a massive job. If I'm being honest, it took us about 6 to 8 months to jump through all the hoops we needed to jump through to be able to even leave the country. This is including passports. This is including what we were going to do from a schooling perspective with the boys and researching what we were going to do from a homeschool perspective, just logistics with the business and making sure that can work while we work remotely. That's filing with Centrelink that we're not going to be in the country anymore. Things like that. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And people don't realize how many hoops there is. It's not like when you're a 20-year-old kid and you want to go backpacking, you throw a backpack on and you just head off. When you got kids, there's way more to consider, especially if you've got commitments too. So that was one massive con, is that it does take a long time to get prepared to be able to even leave the country for an extended period of time. The government doesn't want people to leave. There's checks and balances that you have to do. Just little things like when we left, it was just after COVID and everyone was getting their passports. We had to get passports for the boys, and that took ages. So there's that to consider. There's a lot of logistics involved. Organizing your travel insurance and health insurance, organizing certified copies of your passport, certified copies of your documents. Where are you going to store all your precious items and all your sentimental items? That all comes into consideration, and it's overwhelming. Once you're into it, once you're moving through the process, it's not too bad, but it's not something you can just drop everything and do. It takes planning and it takes logistics. But if you're serious about doing this and you want to learn a little bit more about how we could potentially help, there's a link in the description below. Come and hit us up and let's have a chat about it. The next con of doing what we did, which is selling all our stuff and moving over here, was the selling of the stuff. Oh my God. I never want to have another garage sale in my life after realizing how much effort it takes to do 5 or 6 of the bloody things. So when we left Australia, we literally sold everything we owned. We figured that if we ever come back, we could just buy it again. The first thing you realize is that the stuff that you own is not worth much at all. When you go to sell it wholesale, when you go and liquidate it at garage sales, you know, the $3,000 toolbox I had from when I was a mechanical fitter was worth $400. Our fridge was worth $200 that we paid $1,000 for. That's the kind of thing you got to realize. And it's a bit of a shock to the system, and it's exhausting. We were doing garage sales, we were doing Facebook Marketplace, we were doing anything we could to move our stuff. And by the end, I was just ready to give it all to an op shop. It was that exhausting. So that's one massive con, is that you've collected a lifetime's worth of stuff in your house. It has to go somewhere. And it's very expensive to store that stuff. If you wanted to store a house worth of stuff in a self-storage container, it could cost you $500-600 a month. That's why we decided to sell it, because we figured, again, better off just selling it. We can always buy it back if we need to. And if we do go back to Australia, what we're going to do is go to garage sales and buy this stuff ourselves. We're definitely not going to buy anything off the shelf anymore if we ever go back. We'll just go to garage sales. We'll just go to op shops and things like that and buy the bits we need. I think the third thing to consider if you're wanting to have this lifestyle is that while it's absolutely amazing that we get to spend as much time together as we do as a family, I wouldn't swap that for the world. It can get exhausting, and it's very hard to get away from each other because you're in each other's pockets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You think about it, right? It's you against the rest of the world. If you move to a new country and you don't know anyone, it's your family and your little family unit, and that's about it. That's your like circle of connections at the start. There are days where my wife is sick of me, and because she's sick of me, it's better now because we have been traveling for so long and we have been on the road for so long. But at the start, it is quite intimidating for my wife, who's 5'2" and weighs nothing, to go off on her own and without me. And so it's hard to get over that, because in Australia, if you want time away from your significant other, you just jump in the car and go and see your friends down the road for a coffee. You can't really do that when you're traveling. Admittedly, you start to make friends on the road and you start to make those connections like we have, but at the start, it's quite a big hurdle to get over. And if you're quite a social butterfly in Australia and you like to go for your coffees with your friends and catch up with your friends and stuff like that, you got to realize that this is quite lonely, especially at the very start. The way we've gotten over that is by just really putting ourselves out there, really going into Facebook groups and asking what activities are on, what events are on and stuff. And we've met people along the way doing that, which has made a massive difference. And I think another con, and this is one that's not talked about very much, is that if something goes wrong, let's say it's like a health scare, it's actually quite scary being in another country if you have a health scare. Even though we have insurance, even though I know we're going to be okay, it's not like being at home where your local hospital, your relatives are around or friends are around. You got someone there that can take the kids if you have to rush to hospital. You don't have that in a new country if you've just moved there. So it's quite intimidating actually to be in that situation and not actually know the outcome, right? Like the thing is, in Australia, if you've lived in Australia a long time, okay, this is how the healthcare system works. This is how you go to hospital. This is how you do your triage. In these countries, you have no idea. You're just going with the flow. And if you're in pain or one of your family members is in pain, it can be quite stressful, which is something you need to consider. I think another con is that the culture shock is real. Even though we're here in Malaysia and the culture is very similar to Australia, they're very understanding. English is widely spoken here. There's still cultural differences. It's actually very difficult to maintain the Australian way of life that you had in Australia here in Malaysia. Like just little things like going out to a public park and having a barbecue is not something that's done here. Just little things you may have done at home, driving down to a local park and going for a run, is more difficult to do here because it's hot. So you've got to learn and just go with the flow and adjust and go like the things that I did in Australia, I may not necessarily be able to do wholesale one for one here. And so that's a bit of a cultural shock. That's a bit of an adjustment, but it is something over time you do get used to. And that goes for food as well. Something we noticed in Australia that we got very used to is like, we go into a Woolworths, we go into a Coles, we go into an Aldi, we know exactly where everything is. We know the brands that we like. And then you come to a country like Malaysia and they have completely different brands. They have completely different types of food. The quality is different. The prices are better, obviously, but the quality is different and things like that. And that takes adjustment. And it's all those little micro adjustments to the quality of life that make a massive difference to like your overall happiness in these countries. They like add up. So there's days where we are just like over being over here. They're few and far between, but we have them. It's the next thing someone cuts you off in traffic or a motorbike cuts you off. In Australia, that would be a big deal. Over here, it's a nothing thing. And then you have to wait an hour in line at the shopping center, and then you come back home and the internet goes out where you wouldn't expect that at home. And that's something you really do have to be mentally prepared for, because we have met people that are doing the same thing as us, and that slowly breaks them. They end up in some form of depression where it just becomes all they notice. And they forget about all the positives of living in these countries and how beautiful they are and how amazing the people are and things like that. And they only just see the negatives. We do that a lot with these old expats that go to Pattaya and things like that. They just complain about how hot it is, or they just complain about how the cost in Thailand has gone up, and not realizing that they're very lucky to be living in that country and having that quality of life. And this is just a subjective thing, so this may be different for everyone, but this is my personal opinion, is that if you don't have a rock solid relationship with your significant other, any little quirk or anything that you didn't like about them is going to be amplified several fold if you're spending all day, every day with them. Now, I'm very lucky, even though I have a lot of quirks and a lot of things that I know my partner doesn't like about me. She's a very tolerant woman, and vice versa, obviously. But in all seriousness, I think if our relationship wasn't as solid as it is, it would be very difficult to be living over here and having the isolation of not having your friends and family around and only having each other. Because this traveling and living overseas, it exposes all that, exposes like the underbelly. And a lot of people, they have unresolved issues that they really shouldn't be adding the extra stress of living in another country to solve. And that's one last thing I will say, is that even though living in these countries is amazing and it's beautiful, it is more stressful than living in Australia in a lot of ways, because of the language barriers, because of the culture differences, because of the loneliness and things like that. And all we found is that the one way we reduce that stress is by putting extra effort in to resolving those things. So like in regards to the loneliness side of things, we've just gone out and made more friends. In regards to the kids and them making friends, we have them doing lots of activities. We keep them active, we keep them busy. And because of that, we're doing more than we would have in Australia, because we have to, because we're forced to in this situation. In Australia, you can get into this like comfortable phase where you just don't do anything anymore because it's comfortable. Whereas because you're constantly put out of your own comfort zone here in another country, you're forced to look for solutions to that. So I think that is a positive, but it's also a negative, because if you don't handle stress well, when you come to a country like this and the power goes out for 6 hours and it's really hot and the kids are complaining and stuff like that, you need a way to go, it's worth it. It's worth it because it's a beautiful place and the food's cheap and blah, 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 blah. So guys, I just wanted to share this. This is a little bit of an impromptu video. I just wanted to share this. Now, if anyone is thinking about doing this and they're struggling or overwhelmed with the thought and the process and all the things that go with this, send us a message on Instagram. There's a link in the description. Let's have a chat about it. Maybe we can help. But guys, thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you all on the horizon.